مارك روته يبلغ من العمر 57 عاماً، وقد خدم لمدة 14 عاماً كرئيس لوزراء هولندا، وكان مدافعاً رئيساً عن الدعم العسكري الأوروبي لأوكرانيا. درس التاريخ وعمل مديراً للموارد البشرية في شركة المنتجات الاستهلاكية المتعددة الجنسيات يونيليفر، ثم أصبح رئيس وزراء هولندا للمرة الأولى في أكتوبر 2010، وقد استقال في يوليو الماضي بعد أن ثار جدل داخل ائتلافه المكون من 4 أحزاب حول حدود الهجرة.
Mr. Mark Rote, the Secretary General of the NATO, thank you so much for giving us this interview. It's a pleasure. It's our pleasure in المجلة
here and also your audience. Great to see you. Yeah.
Of course, the big question now in the whole world is the President-elect Donald Trump. And it was big news when you went to Florida, I think, and you met with him. Could you please tell us what did you discuss with Mr. Trump?
Well, I cannot, of course, disclose what he said, but we worked very well together when I was Prime Minister between 2016 and 2020 in his first term. I think we both enjoyed working together, and I thought it would be good to go out early after his elections, and it was possible for us to meet in Florida, and we had a good conversation, a very good conversation. So let's say what I've emphasized very much. First of all, I thanked him for the fact that he forced us to spend more on defense in Europe. I think he has been very successful in that. We are spending now an average of 2% on the European side of NATO, which was much lower when he came into office in 2016. And I've come to the conclusion, I've come to the view that we have to spend much more than 2% if long-term we want to stay safe in NATO, both US and Europe. Secondly, we discussed industrial production. We have to ramp up our defense industrial production. We are not producing enough at the moment compared to what the Russians and the Chinese are doing. And thirdly, obviously, we discussed Ukraine, how to get to a good deal on Ukraine, how to prevent Iran, China, North Korea, Russia. They all are working together now to high-five each other when a bad deal would be struck. So we have to get to a good deal, and we have to make sure that the Ukrainians can start an eventual negotiation with the Russians from a position of strength. So these were the sort of points I made. We agreed that we continue the conversation, our teams, but also directly, in a run-up to him taking over, and of course post-January.
Sir, as you said, you're not going to reveal what he said, but at least you can tell me, like after, this is what you said to him, what you told him. But after meeting him, are you assured, like reassured that transatlantic relations between America and European NATO countries will be sustainable, will be stable in the upcoming 4 years?
Let me be very careful about this, because if I would have had that conversation and then he would have been on television telling the audience what I said, I would also think, hey, this is strange. And he would rightly think, if I would answer that question directly, that would not be helpful, because then I would basically, the trust in that conversation, I would not help building that trust. So I know him very well. I mean, as a politician, we're both politicians, he and I, and we know that ultimately our task is to make sure that when I was a national politician, I had to make sure that the country was safe and that the economy was running well and that we created enough jobs and there was prosperity. And clearly President Trump comes from a place where he wants to have a strong economy, where he wants to have a strong United States which is safe, and knowing that what is happening at transatlantic and Euro-Atlantic, what is happening in the Indo-Pacific are more and more getting interconnected. For example, because of the North Koreans getting involved in Russia. So on all these issues, I really look forward to work with him. But let me not disclose, let's say, my impressions, because I think if he would see that, and I know he watches your program, no, I don't know this, but let's assume he sees this, I would be irritated if I was him, when I would then sit there and say, well, and then he reacted like this, and I felt such and so. I don't think that's right.
But it seems that you are comfortable after that meeting.
Well, because, again, I know that we will continue the conversation. I was very much impressed also by the foreign policy people he found, Rubio and, of course, Waltz and others, and the new ambassador here. I think they are all very strong people, candidates sometimes already appointed, because this is in his power, sometimes having to be confirmed by the Senate. But I think he really cobbled together a strong team.
You mentioned, sir, you mentioned Ukraine, you mentioned the plan for Ukraine, peace plan for Ukraine, but we know that there was some plan was leaked by some American press like Wall Street Journal. What is the plan? What do you think, what is the best plan for Ukraine to make peace with that?
It has to be done step by step. And the first thing we have to do now is to massively support Ukraine to be able to start those talks from a position of strength. And that means that for Ukraine, we have to be sure that we pump into Ukraine enough defense aid. That means anti-missile systems, but also offensive systems, to be sure for the Ukrainians to be able to come to a position of strength. That is absolutely priority 1, 2 and 3 in the foreign ministers meeting here tomorrow and on Wednesday, but also going forward to January, February, March next year. That's really target number 1. And then it has to be the Ukrainian government deciding on which terms and when to start negotiations with the Russians.
But how does the deal should look like, you think?
Well, I have my ideas on this, and like you are intelligence man. You can have your ideas on this, and others will have. But in the end, we are not fighting that war. It is the Ukrainians fighting that war. And that means we have to, I think, respect the fact that it has to be Ukraine itself to come up with their view on what the next steps should be. But it has to start with making sure that Ukraine starts these talks from a position of strength. And that means that we have to do more to support them. And that will be my main message, including how NATO can help, not being party to the conflict, but NATO can help through implementing what we decided in Washington as leaders. The pledge of 40 billion, the command we are building in Wiesbaden, making sure we capture all the learnings.
And I'm sure you read, like it's been said that at least part of the Trump plan is to recognize the reality, and then to delay Ukraine membership for 20 years, for 2 decades.
I mean, again, I think we really should start with Ukraine itself, making sure they can start in a position where they can have successful negotiations with the Russians, and then, of course, from that position to take the next steps. And when I would address Volodymyr Zelensky from here, that is what I will work on. Making sure, Volodymyr, that you are in a position where you can start those talks from a position of strength, and that is what I will work on tirelessly. But I should not, let's say, indulge myself in thinking what then could happen after those talks have started. And how that's first of all up to them.
After the American decision, Biden's decision to let Ukrainian strike into Russia, the Russians were talking about nuclear.
Yeah, but they love for you and me to discuss nuclear. So let me first of all say, NATO takes, of course, the nuclear issue extremely seriously, no doubt. But this is saber rattling by the Russians, and they love you and me to discuss their nuclear capabilities. So I'm not going to do that. No, clearly, allies, NATO very much support allies not to put limitations on the weapon systems they deliver into Ukraine. In the end, it is up to individual allies to decide whether they have yes or no restrictions on the weapon systems they deliver. But let's not spend too much time on Putin and his saber rattling.
We'll come back to international politics, but when it comes to Middle East, I think we have 3 interrelated issues. One is the NATO mission in Iraq.
Yes.
Second, I think His Majesty Kings of Jordan is coming tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And you're going to open office NATO in Amman.
Yeah.
3, the Gulf security and the maritime routes. How do you address the NATO role in these in the Middle East in different files?
Now, let's first of all say that in terms of the core role of NATO is to keep the transatlantic safe, the Euro-Atlantic. So that means the 32 countries, and Article 5 is, of course, limited to NATO territory. So in that sense, we are not involved in the Middle East. But indirectly, we are very much involved. We have, as you rightly said, the NATO mission in Iraq. We have individual NATO allies tirelessly navigating the crisis, Gaza and Hezbollah. We have seen, of course, successful negotiations by the French and the Americans. let's not be naive and now think that everything is stable with Lebanon at the moment, but at least the Americans and the French have been able to come to the ceasefire. And you are absolutely right, we will open that office in Amman, in Jordan. And this is part of our reach out to the southern neighborhood. And that means that we really want to work together with countries like Tunisia, Mauritania, Morocco, basically the whole of Africa, and particularly the northern part of Africa, but also the Middle East. And that is why we have those close relations. And we even have a special representative for the South who is working on that. But of course, it is a different sort of relationship than we have within NATO when it comes to the defense of NATO territory. We really have to make that distinction.
The Gulf? The Gulf?
And the same for the Gulf. So we have many relations, of course, with Gulf countries and working with them. But also here, in the end, NATO is not in the business of expanding NATO territory to the Gulf or to the Indo-Pacific, but we want our partners. These are all partners with which we work very closely together.
Mr. Rote, China is the big issue now, the big question.
Right.
Especially with Trump. We all hear, like, Mr. Trump, like, for him is going to, like, China, relationship with China is top priority. Are you concerned that the Americans under Trump leadership will push the NATO to be on more tense relation with China?
Well, I don't think we. Let's first of all establish a fact that within NATO we have discussed China at length, and what we are seeing is that China is producing more and more weaponry. They have a couple of Chinese companies in the top 10 of biggest worldwide defense companies. They had none 10 years ago. They are ramping up defense industrial production and defense industrial base. They are, through Ws and sanction circumvention, supporting Russia's war effort in Ukraine and working together with North Korea and Iran, China, Russia, the four of them working together, basically helping Russia in the war effort, and Russia paying for this by, for example, this missile technology to North Korea, or money to Iran, for Iran then to support Hezbollah and Hamas and other proxies in the Middle East. So this is all getting connected. When you really focus on China, I would say, for example, we will discuss on Wednesday, when we are sitting with the foreign ministers, very much the issues about cyber, how sometimes energy is used is weaponized, energy supplies, but also sabotage. And in the past we would very much focus this on Russia, but more and more we also have to focus this on China. And how, as NATO allies, we defend ourselves against that. So in that sense, yes, with the Americans, but not because of Trump or Biden, but because we, as a NATO alliance, really sense that we should not be naive about China. We have to discuss that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much for giving us this interview for المجلة. It's really been a great pleasure doing this interview. Thank you so much.
Entirely on my side, the pleasure. Thank you.